Good day. I had not originally intended to do a programme on Sofagate, the ludicrous episode whereby Claude Michel, President of the European Council, and Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, visited Erdogan, President Erdogan of Turkey, in Turkey, and found that the Turks had not provided enough seating arrangements for the two of them, because in part this episode seemed to me fairly trivial, and we discussed it on the Duran, Alex Christoforou and I, in a detailed programme in which we looked at the situation in Turkey overall, discussed the possibility of a coup there, and touched on Turkey's current political and economic situation. I've nonetheless decided to come back to this episode because it has revealed a number of remarkable facts about the European Union, which will surprise, I think, none of us. Firstly, there is the ludicrous quality of this episode itself, which I will touch on in a moment. But more importantly, is the extraordinary way in which EU officials, once they find themselves in these embarrassing situations, instead of taking steps to move on from them, dwell on them in a way that in effect draws even further attention to them. So, since that disastrous meeting in Turkey, we've had a whole succession of comments by EU officials, including Ursula von der Leyen and some of her allies, saying that what the Turks and Erdogan did was a studied insult directed at Ursula von der Leyen, that it was somehow intended to emphasize Turkey's low regard for women, all of this being done supposedly in connection with a Turkish law which will remove certain protections from women in Turkey, and even further comments by the likes of Mario Draghi, now Prime Minister of Italy, former head of the European Central Bank, and a loyal supporter of the EU and member of the EU Combine, if you will, in which he is now called Erdogan a dictator on the strength of this bizarre episode. All I will say about this is that it shows once more the extraordinary self-importance and self-regard of EU officials and their inability to let an issue of protocol, minor as this one was, go. They could have laughed it off, or they could have moved on to other topics, or they could have said that it was trivial and unimportant, and they could have focused instead on the important topics which they supposedly discussed with Erdogan at that meeting in Turkey. Instead, they've harped on this issue in a way that only emphasizes their own humiliation and reminds us incessantly of it. At a time when the EU bureaucracy and its officials, and Ursula von der Leyen specifically, are coming in for a great deal of criticism across Europe for their incompetent pandemic response, that seems to me, frankly, a bizarre a sense of priorities. But there we are. That is the sort of people these EU officials are. Now, I'm going to just say a few words about this episode itself. Firstly, the Turks completely deny that they intended to do anything that was intended to embarrass or offend or humiliate the EU officials. They say that the seating arrangements had been agreed in advance with the Europeans, and it was the Europeans' own fault that proper arrangements were not made. Well, I have to say I am sceptical about that, and I don't assume anything that Erdogan and his officials on such a topic say is true, but given the serial incompetence that the Commission and its officials have shown, it would not surprise me at the same time if it was true. The second thing I would say is that the episode itself could have been resolved and should have been resolved by Michel, President of the Commission, and Ursula von der Leyen when it happened. When they arrived in the room and found that there was insufficient seating for the two of them, they should have simply said so. They should have asked Erdogan and his officials to provide a seat for Ursula von der Leyen, and one would surely have been provided. If Erdogan and his officials had been reckless enough or foolish enough to have refused, well, they could have simply left the room and told Erdogan that the meeting could not take place until the question of the seating had been resolved. That would have been a strong statement to Erdogan. It would have put him and the Turks in a difficult position. And I'm sure that rather than have the entire meeting collapse, Erdogan would have done what they wanted, and we would have had seating provided within a few minutes, and the entire summit meeting could have gone on from there. The Europeans, Michel and Ursula von der Leyen, did nothing of the kind, and as a result, they set themselves up for the humiliation they have just experienced. But it goes deeper and further, because what is so interesting about this episode is that Claude Michel, who is of course the president of the European Council, decided to sit in the chair closest to Erdogan, leaving Ursula von der Leyen standing until she eventually found herself obliged to sit on the famous, or rather infamous, sofa. Now, perhaps I am an old-fashioned man. Perhaps I have sort of ridiculous and passé ideas about what courtesies people should follow. But I still think that in these kind of situations where there is insufficient seating for a man and a woman, it is the man who ought to defer to the woman and give her the seat. Claude Michel conspicuously refused to do that. He decided that he would sit down, and he did not give his seat to Ursula von der Leyen. Why did he do that? Is it because Claude Michel is a rude man? Perhaps it is. Perhaps it's also the case that, like many other people, he finds dealing with Ursula von der Leyen extremely difficult, and perhaps there is some personal friction or tension between the two of them. Who knows? He wouldn't be the only person who finds Ursula von der Leyen a difficult person to work with. However, I think it's more likely that what it's all about is this perennial battle of protocol between the President of the European Council, currently Claude Michel, and the President of the European Commission, currently Ursula von der Leyen, as to which of them is the senior person within the EU structure. Is it the President of the Council, who chairs meetings of the EU leaders, the heads of state and government of the various member countries, at council meetings where the key decisions are taken? Or is it the President of the Commission, who heads the actual EU bureaucracy, which actually drafts most of the regulations and the laws, and which actually tends to take the steps of enforcing them? This is an issue which has never been resolved, even though it is in some respects, perhaps in the future, an important one. Specifically, if the EU really is an embryo state, and if it one day becomes a state, will it be a presidential state, in which case the head of the European Council, the president of the European Council, currently Claude Michel, is the senior? Or is it a parliamentary state, in which case it is the head of the government or president of the European Commission, currently Ursula von der Leyen, who would be senior to the president of the council? Well, we don't know. This has not been resolved, and there is perennial infighting between the two as to which of them takes precedence over the other. To be entirely frank, I do wonder whether, if the Turks are right and it was the EU itself that was responsible for the lack of proper seating arrangements, whether this was done on purpose by Claude Michel and his officials in order to humiliate Ursula von der Leyen and to emphasize that it is Claude Michel who is senior to her and not the other way round. Well, who knows, and maybe it's unwise to speculate about these things. But firstly, there's a few points that can be made. On the one hand, the entire summit meeting between the EU and the Turks has collapsed into total farce. This was supposed to be an important meeting to discuss the question of refugees and to provide funding to Turkey to prevent these refugees from coming to Europe, a matter which is of existential political importance to various EU leaders, especially those in Germany. Remarkably, the EU has agreed to provide funding to Turkey to stop these refugees coming. Instead of having everybody talk about that and about the fact that the topic of Turkey's future EU membership was also discussed, we're instead talking about seating arrangements, and this bizarre episode is being dragged out with all these comments from people like Mario Draghi monopolizing the attention. Secondly, and perhaps more remarkably, it is the way in which when EU officials like Ursula von der Leyen and Claude Michel come face to face with the real leader of a real country, things seem to fall apart. Erdogan ought to be, at this moment in time, in serious political trouble. Turkey's economy is in crisis. There's talk of a coup in Turkey. He's had 10 admirals arrested after they published a letter criticising his project to build a canal which will bypass the straits. And there's always, in Turkey itself, indications of growing political instability, and Turkey is also enmeshed in a difficult war now in Syria, where Turkish troops are involved and engaged. Logically, it ought to be Erdogan in a weak position, not the EU. After all, it was Erdogan who was asking for money. Instead, it is the EU leaders who have managed to comprehensively humiliate themselves before Erdogan, the Turks, and the entire world, and to publicize the fact, so that we know all about it across the international media, with this story, instead of dying down, escalating even further over the course of the next few days. Last but not least, it's a further indication of the EU's extraordinarily difficult relationship with all the major countries on its periphery. The EU is currently involved in an ongoing quarrel with the British over the arrangements over Brexit and, of course, over the question of medications and the pandemic response. It's got an impossible relationship with Russia, which has been completely wrecked as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently said in a series of interviews and statements, and as I have discussed at length in programs on this channel. And now we see how bad relations with Turkey have become, with Mario Draghi of Italy making comments like calling Erdogan a dictator. These are the three biggest countries around the EU on its periphery: Britain, Russia, and Turkey. All of them very different, none of them in particularly easy relations with each other. But what unites all three of them is that they all have simultaneously bad relations or difficult relations with the EU. I mean, it takes remarkable skill or lack of skill on the part of the EU leadership to bring things to such a pass with all three of its major neighbours. And yet that is what the EU has achieved. Lastly, I have to remind myself and our viewers that, of course, we've seen something rather like this farcical event happen once before in the last few weeks. I refer, of course, to the equally ludicrous and disastrous visit of EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, to Moscow back in February. As you will all remember from the programs which I did on this channel, when Borrell went there with intentions of lecturing the Russians about their treatment of Alexei Navalny, he found the Russians in no mood to accept lectures. He found all his comments thrown back at him by Sergei Lavrov over the course of a very tough meeting, during which Borrell proved completely unprepared and sorely underbriefed. And Borrell, of course, was also exposed as completely incompetent and out of his depth in a difficult press conference, which took place subsequent to that meeting. So that was a profound and disastrous humiliation for the EU over the course of that meeting, and it's now been capped by a further disastrous humiliation for the EU over this meeting with Erdogan in Turkey. Not only does the EU apparently manage to have bad relations with all its neighbours, it also manages to humiliate itself whenever it deals with its neighbours, be it Borrell in Moscow or Ursula von der Leyen and Claude Michel in Turkey. They manage to come away from these meetings looking completely ridiculous. Moreover, and this is the sad thing, there's no sign that anything is going to change. Following the debacle of Borrell's visit to Moscow, there were calls from some people in Europe calling on Borrell to resign. Well, of course, he didn't resign. He's still there. He's still busy tweeting and blogging and telling us how badly the Russians treated him and demanding sanctions. And no one pays the slightest attention. His last intervention was when he spoke about the EU's staunch support for Ukraine in its current standoff in eastern Ukraine with the two Donbass republics and with the Russians. And of course, he's instantly undercut by Macron and Merkel, who have talks with Putin and who issue statements that appear to contradict what Borrell said, and by further conversation which Merkel had with Putin, which I'm going to discuss briefly in a different video to this one. And we now see Ursula von der Leyen and Claude Michel going to Turkey and being humiliated all over again, either intentionally by the Turks or by accident because there was a mistake in providing the seating, or due to the incompetence of their own officials, or just possibly because there was an attempt by Michel to bring Ursula von der Leyen down a peg by making some kind of backstairs agreement on seating with the Turks. Who knows? One way or the other, this is an abject performance, and it is all of a piece with the abject performance the EU officials are showing in their handling of the pandemic response and in so many other matters. Their response, and we see this again with their criticism and abuse of Erdogan, is to blame everybody but themselves. Instead of the EU undertaking a review, asking itself, why does it repeatedly get into these situations? Why is it that they end up being put in these embarrassing positions when they meet with Erdogan? Instead of doing that, they engage in a battle of abuse and invective with the Turkish president, whom presumably they actually want to work with. Otherwise, why meet with him at all? It's the same in connection with the relationship with the British over Brexit and the pandemic response, as I've discussed at great length in various programs on this channel. And it is the same with Borrell's visit to Russia and with relations with Russia generally, as I have also discussed at great length on this channel. The attitude of EU leaders when things go wrong and when mistakes are made is never to apologize, never to admit that they are responsible in any way, even the slightest or even the smallest, for something that goes wrong. It is to abuse and criticize and say offensive and insulting things about others. So it's the British who are being greedy, it's AstraZeneca that's engaging in plots, it's the Russians who are being aggressive, and it's the Turks who are insulting women. One cannot conduct policy at any level in this way. I really do start to wonder how much longer this ludicrous show can continue on this road. For the rest, I will finish this programme by saying that so long as the EU continues to be led by people like Claude Michel and Ursula von der Leyen, it is not going to be taken seriously in world affairs. And if it has that kind of aspiration, well, it needs to think very hard about whether it should change its leadership, and if it cannot change its leadership, about the entire nature of its project and whether, in fact, it is worthwhile. Thank you for joining me on this programme. Please join me on future programmes, both on this channel and on our other channels, the Duran, where I do programmes with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's channel and our new channel where we show the interactions with our viewers on our live stream. You will find links to all of these channels under this video. Please also support us to the extent that you can via our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. And also support us, if you can, via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. And remember, we accept donations in Bitcoin and other such currencies if you can make them. And last but not least, don't forget to check out our shop, see the wonderful things we have there, our amazing magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and our famous t-shirts. Thank you for joining me for this program, and I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel.